Sarah Martinez stepped off the Greyhound bus in Cedar Falls, Texas, with nothing but a worn duffel bag and a fresh start ahead of her. The small town stretched out before her like something from a postcard. White picket fences, American flags, hanging from front porches, and a main street that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. She pulled her sleeve down instinctively, covering the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her right forearm. At 28, Sarah had seen more of the world than most people in Cedar Falls would see in a lifetime. 3 tours in Afghanistan as an Army medic had left her with skills that could save lives and memories that haunted her sleep. But now, she was just another newcomer looking for work in a town that prized tradition above all else. Her first stop was Miller's Diner, where a help-wanted sign hung crooked in the window. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Sarah was used to being stared at, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture straight as a rifle barrel, and her brown eyes that seemed to see everything at once. But these weren't the respectful glances she'd earned in the military. These were the suspicious looks of people sizing up an outsider. "Can I help you, honey?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s with bleached hair and a name tag that read Dolores. Her smile was polite but guarded. "I'd like to apply for the waitress position," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear. Dolores looked her up and down, taking in Sarah's clean jeans and pressed shirt. "You got experience?" "Some customer service. I'm a hard worker, always on time, and I learn fast." "Well, I suppose we could use the help." Dolores handed her an application. "Fill this out and I'll show it to Frank. He's the owner." Sarah sat in a corner booth, aware that several patrons were still watching her. As she filled out the form, she caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Wonder where she's from. Doesn't look like she's from around here. Probably just passing through." When she reached the section asking about military service, Sarah paused for only a moment before checking yes and writing U.S. Army 2015-2023 Honorable Discharge. She wasn't ashamed of her service, even if some people didn't understand it. Frank Miller emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a grease-stained apron. He was a large man with thinning hair and skeptical eyes. "So you want to work here?" "Huh?" "Yes, sir. I'm reliable and I work well with people." Frank glanced at her application. "Army, huh? You one of those women trying to prove something?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, though his tone rankled her. "I'm someone who served my country and now I'm looking for honest work." "Well, I suppose we could give you a trial run. But this is a family establishment. We don't tolerate any nonsense here. You start tomorrow at 6 a.m. Uniform is black pants, white shirt, and keep yourself looking neat and clean." As Sarah stood to leave, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing just the edge of her tattoo. Frank's eyes narrowed. "And keep those decorations covered up. This is a respectable place." Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks, but she simply nodded. "Understood, sir." That evening, Sarah sat in her small rented room above Henderson's hardware store, looking at the tattoo that had caused such a reaction. It was beautiful work, an eagle with spread wings, its talons gripping a banner that read, "Honor, Courage, Commitment." Beneath it were the names of her fallen brothers and sisters in arms, surrounded by delicate flowers that represented hope and remembrance. It had cost her 3 months' pay and took 12 hours to complete, but every line meant something. She thought about Master Sergeant Williams, whose name was etched in elegant script near her wrist. He'd saved her life during a mortar attack. In Kandahar, throwing himself over her wounded body while she worked to save a local child caught in the crossfire. The tattoo wasn't just ink, it was a memorial, a promise, a piece of her soul made visible. But Frank Miller and the people of Cedar Falls would only see trouble, rebellion, someone who didn't fit their narrow idea of what a proper woman should be. Sarah had faced Taliban fighters, treated wounds that would make most people faint, and carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. She wasn't about to let small-town prejudice break her now. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Miller's diner 15 minutes early, her tattoo carefully concealed beneath a long-sleeved white shirt despite the Texas heat. Dolores showed her the ropes, which tables belonged to which regular customers, how Frank liked the coffee prepared, and the unspoken rules that governed the social order of the establishment. "Now, honey," Dolores said, lowering her voice. "Most of these folks have lived here their whole lives. They're good people, but they're set in their ways. Just keep your head down, do your work, and you'll get along fine." Sarah nodded, understanding the subtext. Don't rock the boat. Don't stand out. Don't give them any reason to find fault with you. The morning rush brought a steady stream of customers. Construction workers grabbing coffee before heading to job sites, mothers dropping their children at school, and retirees settling in for their daily gossip sessions. Sarah moved efficiently between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. It was during the lunch rush that she first encountered the Hawkins brothers. Tom and Jerry Hawkins owned the largest construction company in the county and considered themselves the unofficial kings of Cedar Falls. They swaggered into the diner like they owned the place, their work boots dirty and their voices loud. "Well, well," Tom said, looking Sarah up and down as she approached their table. "Who's the new meat?" "I'm Sarah, your server today. What can I get you, gentlemen?" Jerry laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "Listen to that. Gentlemen, she's got manners, I'll give her that." Sarah kept her expression pleasant as she took their orders, but she could feel their eyes following her as she walked away. When she returned with their food, Tom deliberately knocked over his water glass. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "Guess you better clean that up, sweetheart." As Sarah bent to wipe up the spill, she felt her sleeve ride up slightly. Tom's sharp eyes caught the glimpse of ink beneath the fabric. "Hold on there," he said, grabbing her wrist. "What have you got hiding under there?" Sarah pulled her arm back quickly, but it was too late. "It's nothing." "Nothing?" Jerry leaned forward, interested now. "Come on, don't be shy. Let's see what kind of artwork you're sporting." "Please let me finish cleaning this up," Sarah said, her voice still steady but with a steel edge that made other customers look over. Tom wasn't deterred. "I bet it's some kind of gang tattoo, or maybe one of those feminist statements. What do you think, Jerry?" Frank Miller had been watching from behind the counter, and now he approached with heavy steps. "Is there a problem here?" "Just curious about your new girl's hidden decorations," Tom said. "She seems real eager to keep them covered up." Frank's face darkened as he looked at Sarah. "I thought I made myself clear about that." "You did, sir. It's covered." "Not covered enough, apparently." Frank's voice carried across the suddenly quiet diner. "This is a family establishment. We don't need customers wondering what kind of person is serving their food." Sarah felt every eye in the place on her. The shame and anger warred in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I understand, sir. It won't happen again." As she walked back to the kitchen, she heard Tom Hawkins call out, "What do you bet it's some kind of prison tattoo? Or maybe she's one of those army girls who thinks she's tough as a man." Laughter followed his words, and Sarah's hands shook slightly as she refilled coffee pots. She'd faced down insurgents and treated casualties under fire, but somehow this felt worse. This felt personal in a way that combat never had. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of whispered comments and sideways glances. When closing time finally came, Sarah helped clean the kitchen and dining room in silence, her mind racing with doubts about her decision to stay in Cedar Falls. As she was leaving, Dolores touched her arm gently. "Don't mind them, honey. Small towns can be hard on newcomers. Give it time." "Thanks," Sarah said, but she wasn't sure time would make any difference. That night, she sat in her small room and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. The woman looking Back at her had served her country with honor, had saved lives and made a difference in the world. But here in Cedar Falls, she was just an outsider with questionable ink and a past that didn't fit their comfortable assumptions. Sarah rolled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo again. Master Sergeant Williams smiled at her from a faded photograph. On her nightstand, the last picture taken before that final patrol. She could almost hear his voice. "Martinez, you've got more courage in your little finger than most people have in their whole body. Don't you ever forget that." She wouldn't forget. And she wouldn't let the Tom Hawkinses of the world drive her away from the new life she was trying to build. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her trial's eye. The second week at Miller's Diner brought no relief for Sarah. If anything, the whispers had grown louder and the stares more pointed. Word had spread through Cedar Falls's gossip network faster than wildfire. The new waitress had tattoos, and that meant she was trouble. Sarah had taken to wearing long sleeves even in the sweltering Texas heat. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Tom Hawkins had made sure of that, dropping hints and spreading speculation wherever he went. By now, half the town was convinced she was either an ex-convict, a gang member, or worse. It was Tuesday morning when things came to a head. Sarah was refilling coffee for Mrs. Henderson, the hardware store owner's wife, when she overheard a conversation at the next table. "I just don't feel comfortable with her handling my food," said Margaret Yates, the town librarian. "You don't know what kind of diseases those people carry." "Those people?" asked her companion, Helen Ross, who ran the local beauty salon. "You know, the tattooed ones, gang members, drug addicts, that sort. They're all the same." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she poured, causing coffee to splash into Mrs. Henderson's saucer. She quickly wiped it up, mumbling an apology. Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman in her 70s, patted Sarah's hand gently. "Don't mind them, dear. Some people have nothing better to do than run their mouths." But the damage was building day by day, comment by comment. Sarah noticed how some customers would specifically ask for Dolores to serve them. Others would examine their food suspiciously, as if she might have contaminated it somehow. Children were pulled closer to their parents when she approached their tables. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon. Sarah was cleaning tables when she heard her name mentioned from a booth in the corner. 3 women sat there, the wives of prominent businessmen, the social arbiters of Cedar Falls society. "I heard she was dishonorably discharged from the Army," said Patricia Hawkins, Tom's wife. "Probably for insubordination or fighting." "I wouldn't be surprised," added Linda Crawford, whose husband owned the bank. "You can tell just by looking at her that she's got a violent streak. Those tattoos prove it." The third woman, Susan Clark, nodded sagely. "My husband says we need to be careful about who we let into our community. People like her bring nothing but trouble." Sarah's chest tightened, but she continued wiping down tables, pretending not to hear. But Patricia Hawkins wasn't done. "I think we should petition Frank to fire her," Patricia said, raising her voice just enough to ensure Sarah could hear. "Before she corrupts our children or brings her criminal friends to town." That was too much. Sarah straightened up, her dark eyes flashing with controlled anger. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I couldn't help overhearing. I think there's been some misunderstanding about my military service." Patricia's face flushed with artificial indignation. "I beg your pardon? Are you eavesdropping on private conversations?" "When those conversations are about me and full of lies, yes, I am." Sarah's voice was steady but carried an undertone that made nearby customers stop their own chatter. "I served 8 years in the United States Army with an honorable discharge. I was a combat medic who saved lives, not took them." Linda Crawford sniffed disdainfully. "That's exactly what someone with something to hide would say." "What I have to hide," Sarah said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the memorial tattoo, "are the names of heroes who died serving this country." This tattoo honors their sacrifice, not celebrates violence. The three women recoiled as if she'd shown them something obscene. Patricia Hawkins gasped dramatically. "How dare you display that? That thing in a family restaurant!" "How dare I honor fallen soldiers?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention. "How dare I remember friends who died protecting the freedoms you enjoy every day?" Frank Miller emerged from the kitchen, his face dark with anger. "What's going on out here?" "This woman is harassing customers and displaying inappropriate body. Art!" Patricia declared, pointing at Sarah like she was reporting a crime. Frank's eyes went to Sarah's exposed tattoo, and his jaw clenched. "I told you to keep that covered up." "I was explaining to these ladies that it's a military memorial, not gang colors or prison ink," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I don't care what it is," Frank snapped. "Cover it up and get back to work, and apologize to these ladies for disturbing their lunch." Sarah looked around the suddenly quiet diner. Every face was turned toward her, waiting to see what she would do. Some showed curiosity, others disgust, and a few, like Mrs. Henderson, showed sympathy. But no one spoke up in her defense. "I apologize for raising my voice," Sarah said carefully, "but I won't apologize for honoring my fallen brothers and sisters in arms." Patricia Hawkins stood up abruptly. "Frank, either you do something about this situation or we'll take our business elsewhere, and we'll make sure our friends do the same." Frank looked at Sarah, then at the three women, then at the other customers watching the drama unfold. Cedar Falls was a small town, and the Hawkinses, Crawfords, and Clarks carried a lot of weight. Their disapproval could ruin a business. "Sarah," he said heavily, "maybe you should take the rest of the day off. We'll talk about this tomorrow." Sarah felt the dismissal like a physical blow, but she kept her dignity intact. She untied her apron and laid it on the nearest table. "Yes, sir." As she walked toward the door, she heard Patricia Hawkins say loudly, "I don't know why Frank hired someone like that in the first place. This is what happens when you don't properly screen employees." Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, she considered turning around and telling them exactly what she thought of their narrow minds and cruel hearts. She could describe what it felt like to hold a dying soldier in her arms, to work frantically to save a life while bullets whistled overhead, to carry the weight of names tattooed on her skin because it was the only way to keep their memory alive. But she didn't. Instead, she pushed through the door and walked out into the scorching Texas afternoon, leaving behind the air conditioning and the stares and the whispered judgments. Back in her small room, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the tattoo that had caused so much trouble. Each name represented a story. Jimmy Chin, who used to share pictures of his baby daughter. Maria Santos, who could make anyone laugh even in the worst circumstances. David Thompson, who carried extra medical supplies because he couldn't bear to see anyone suffer. They had died heroes, and their memory deserved better than the scorn of people who had never faced danger greater than a difficult crossword puzzle. But in Cedar Falls, their sacrifice meant nothing. Here, the ink that honored them made Sarah a pariah. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dolores. "Frank wants to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't give up, honey." Sarah appreciated Dolores's kindness, but she wasn't naive. Frank Miller was a businessman, and the Hawkinses and their friends represented too much money for him to ignore their complaints. Tomorrow's meeting would probably be her last day at Miller's diner. That evening, Sarah walked the quiet streets of Cedar Falls trying to clear her head. The town looked peaceful in the golden light of sunset. Children playing in yards, families gathering for dinner, the American flag at the courthouse hanging limp in the still air. It was the kind of place where people were supposed to look out for each other, where a veteran should be welcomed and thanked for her service. But appearances could be deceiving. Behind the Norman Rockwell facade lurked the same prejudices and small-minded cruelty that existed everywhere. Here, being different was a crime, and asking for understanding was seen as making excuses. As she passed the town square, Sarah noticed the War Memorial, a granite obelisk surrounded by small American flags. Bronze plaques listed the names of local sons who had died in various conflicts, from World War I through Iraq and Afghanistan. She stopped to read them, recognizing the familiar rhythm of military names and dates. These men were heroes to Cedar Falls. Their sacrifice was honored, with parades and ceremonies. But apparently, heroism had an expiration date. Or maybe it just depended on your gender and whether you had the good sense to keep your memorial tattoos hidden from view. Sarah touched the stone, feeling the coolness against her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the names carved in granite. "I'm sorry they don't understand what service really means." A voice behind her made her turn. "They understand," said an elderly man with white hair and a veteran's cap. "They just don't want to admit it." Sarah studied the man, noting the way he carried himself. Straight back, alert eyes, the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. "Were you deployed, sir?" "Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. Lost a lot of good friends over there." He extended his hand. "Colonel James Mitchell, retired Marines. And you're the young lady causing such a stir at Miller's Diner." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who understood duty and honor. "Sarah Martinez, former Army medic. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Trouble has a way of finding people like us," Colonel Mitchell said with a slight smile. "Mind if I ask about the tattoo that's got everyone's feathers ruffled?" Without hesitation, Sarah rolled up her sleeve, revealing the memorial piece in the dying light. Colonel Mitchell studied it carefully, his eyes moving from name to name, taking in every detail of the eagle and the flowers, the careful script, and the symbolic imagery. Beautiful. Colonel James Mitchell had lived in Cedar Falls for 15 years, ever since his retirement from the Marine Corps. In all that time, he'd watched the town's politics and social dynamics with the detached interest of a military strategist. He understood power structures, chain of command, and how information flowed through communities. What he'd witnessed at the War Memorial that evening had activated something in him that had been dormant for too long. The next morning, while Sarah was preparing for what might be her final meeting with Frank Miller, Colonel Mitchell was conducting his own reconnaissance mission. His first stop was the Cedar Falls Public Library, where Margaret Yates held court over the town's information hub. "Good morning, Margaret," the colonel said, approaching the circulation desk with the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Margaret looked up from her computer, her expression brightening. "Oh, good morning, Colonel Mitchell. How can I help you today?" "I'm doing some research on military service in our community. I understand we have a new resident who served in Afghanistan." Margaret's face immediately soured. "Oh, you mean that woman at the diner? I wouldn't call her service particularly distinguished, from what I hear." "Really? What have you heard exactly?" The question was asked with such military precision that Margaret found herself answering before she'd thought better of it. "Well, Tom Hawkins says she's got gang tattoos and was probably discharged for misconduct. You know how some of these modern soldiers are, not like the men of your generation, Colonel." Mitchell's gray eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And Tom Hawkins would know about military conduct how exactly?" Margaret faltered. "Well, he's just concerned about the kind of people coming into our town." "The kind of people," the colonel repeated slowly, "who volunteer to serve their country in combat zones." "I understand. Thank you for your time, Margaret." His next stop was Crawford's Bank, where he had maintained accounts for over a decade. Richard Crawford greeted him warmly, always eager to please one of his more substantial depositors. "Colonel, good to see you. What brings you in today?" "Just handling some business, Richard." But I wanted to ask you about something I heard. There's talk around town about our newest resident, the young lady working at Miller's Diner. Crawford's expression shifted to one of knowing concern. Ah, yes. Bit of a situation there, I'm afraid. Linda says the woman has some very questionable associations. Tattoos, you know. Probably mixed up with the wrong crowd. Tattoos, Colonel Mitchell mused. Military memorial tattoos, from what I understand. Well, that's what she claims, but you never know with people like that. They'll say anything to justify their choices. Colonel Mitchell leaned forward slightly, and something in his manner made Crawford unconsciously straighten up. People like what, Richard? I just meant, well, you know, troublemakers. People who don't fit in with our community values. I see. And what values would those be, exactly? Crawford began to look uncomfortable. Traditional values. Family values. The kind of thing that built this country. Built by people like the soldiers who've served overseas, perhaps? Well, yes, of course, but only certain soldiers are worthy of respect? The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Colonel Mitchell extracting information with the skill of a master interrogator. By the time he left the bank, he had a clear picture of how the gossip network had poisoned opinion against Sarah Martinez. Meanwhile, at Miller's Diner, Sarah sat across from Frank Miller in his small office behind the kitchen. The meeting wasn't going well. Look, Sarah, Frank said, rubbing his temples. You seem like a decent person, and Dolores says you're a good worker. But this is a business, and I can't afford to lose customers over this situation. What situation exactly? Sarah asked. The fact that I'm a veteran? Or that I have a memorial tattoo honoring fallen soldiers? It's not about what the tattoo represents. It's about how it makes people feel. This is a conservative town, and folks here don't like changes or differences. Sarah felt her last hope slipping away. So you're firing me. I'm suggesting maybe Cedar Falls isn't the right fit for you. There are bigger cities where people might be more understanding. Where people might be more understanding of someone who served their country. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's not that simple, and you know it. Before Sarah could respond, the office door opened without a knock. Colonel Mitchell stepped in, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the small room. Frank, the colonel said with military crispness, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Frank jumped to his feet, clearly flustered. Colonel Mitchell? No, not at all. Sarah and I were just discussing her employment situation. Ah, perfect timing then. The colonel's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her straight posture and the way she held herself, despite the obvious stress of the situation. You must be Sarah Martinez, James Mitchell, retired Marine Corps. Sarah stood and extended her hand. Pleased to meet you, sir. The handshake was firm and brief, but in that moment, Colonel Mitchell assessed everything he needed to know about Sarah's character. Her grip was confident, her eye contact direct, and despite the circumstances, she maintained her military bearing. I understand you served as a medic in Afghanistan, the colonel continued. Yes, sir. 3 tours, 2020 to 2023. Commendable service. I was just discussing your situation with some of our fellow citizens. It seems there's been some confusion about your character and background. Frank looked between them nervously. Now, Colonel, this is really a private matter. Is it? Colonel. Mitchell's voice carried the authority of 3 decades in command. When a combat veteran is being driven out of our community based on rumors and prejudice, I'd say that's very much a public matter. He turned back to Sarah. May I see this tattoo that's caused such controversy? Without hesitation, Sarah rolled up her sleeve. Colonel Mitchell examined the memorial piece with the same careful attention he'd given it the night before, but this time Frank Miller was watching too. Outstanding craftsmanship, the colonel said, and deeply meaningful. These are your fallen comrades? Yes, sir. People I served with. People who died protecting others. Colonel Mitchell nodded solemnly, then turned to Frank. This young woman has a memorial to fallen heroes tattooed on her arm, and your response is to fire her because it makes some customers uncomfortable? Frank's face was red with embarrassment and confusion. Colonel, The thing is, people are talking. People are always talking, Frank. The question is whether you're going to let gossip and ignorance drive your business decisions. The Colonel's voice carried a warning that made Frank step back involuntarily. But Tom Hawkins and his wife, they're saying, I'm well aware of what the Hawkinses are saying. What I want to know is what you're going to do about it. Frank looked desperately between the two military veterans standing in his office. The social pressure from the town's elite was real and threatening to his business. But the moral pressure from Colonel Mitchell was something else entirely. The weight of a man who had commanded respect in life-and-death situations. I need time to think about this, Frank stammered. Take all the time you need, Colonel Mitchell said. But while you're thinking, Sarah will continue working here with full support from management. Any customer who has a problem with the combat veterans serving their food can take their business elsewhere. It wasn't really a request, and Frank knew it. He nodded weakly, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. As they left the office together, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Thank you, sir, but I don't want you to feel like you have to fight my battles for me. Colonel Mitchell paused in the dining room, looking around at the American flag displayed near the register, the patriotic decorations, and the general atmosphere of small-town Americana. Ms. Martinez, I've seen what happens when good people stand by and let bullies run roughshod over what's right. Your battle is everyone's battle who believes in the values this country is supposed to represent. Dolores approached them, having witnessed the confrontation from the kitchen doorway. Everything okay? Everything's fine, Colonel Mitchell said. Sarah will be continuing her employment here, and I trust she'll receive the respect and support she deserves from both management and customers. Over the next few days, word spread through Cedar Falls that Colonel Mitchell had taken Sarah Martinez under his protection. The colonel's reputation in the community was unassailable. He'd been a decorated combat veteran, a successful businessman after his retirement, and a pillar of the community for 15 years. When he spoke, people listened. But the Hawkins brothers and their social circle weren't ready to back down. They'd built their reputation on being the unofficial power brokers of Cedar Falls, and they didn't appreciate being challenged, even by someone with Colonel Mitchell's credentials. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would force the entire town to choose sides. And at the center of it all was Sarah Martinez, a combat medic whose only crime had been honoring the memory of fallen friends. As Sarah returned to work that afternoon, she noticed some subtle changes. Mrs. Henderson made a point of requesting her as a server and left a generous tip. A few other customers seemed less hostile, though many still avoided eye contact. The real test,